Welcome back to the Interesting Lawyers Podcast. Today's guest is making his second appearance on the show. And you can't ask for anyone better, smarter, or more prominent in the field of criminal law than Bruce Zimet. Bruce, thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure, Russell. Good to be here.
The last time that you were on the show, we were talking about Diddy and the search warrants that were simultaneously served at his homes in Miami and Los Angeles. And you predicted very astutely that Diddy was going to get indicted. And now he's been indicted.
No surprise that he got indicted. I was very surprised at how small the indictment was.
Let's talk about that.
Sure.
I have a copy of the indictment here that I've read and highlighted and studied.
When I say small, I mean that it doesn't have a lot of accusations in it. It has 3 basic counts, all of which are very serious. But I expected a lot more detail in this indictment than we see.
Do you pity Diddy?
I pity Diddy from the standpoint of where he is right now and how he has to fight the charges in this case. He's probably in one of the worst jails in the United States. It's been written up for the horrific conditions, and he has no bond, and he's going to be there till the time of his trial.
Have you been there?
I've been there, yes. It's horrible at
Okay.
this point.
So it's as bad as they say.
It's worse than it.
The last I heard about that jail was when Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. I know there's some controversy about that, but Brad Edwards said that he killed himself, and that's what I'm going with.
There is controversy that, and it's an interesting issue because there's been a lot of talk how similar this case is as to Epstein. I think there's similarities, but I think there's some significant differences.
Let's talk about the indictment. Bruce, let's talk about the Diddy indictment. He's named as Sean Combs, a.k.a. Puff Daddy, a.k.a. P. Diddy, a.k.a. Diddy, a.k.a. PD, a.k.a. Love. I didn't know about that last name. Apparently, he's evolved over the years, and now he's found himself in this correctional center in New York.
He is, and it's a very interesting indictment, to say the least.
What are the 3 most surprising parts of this indictment to you as a 50-year criminal lawyer and former federal prosecutor?
Number 1, the lack of more detail. Number 2, the fact that he's only charged, one person's charged and not multiple defendants. And the third part is the count 2, which only alleges the trafficking as to one person as opposed to multiple people.
Do you believe that there are other unnamed defendants?
I think there are. My guess is that the people have already made deals with the government that are come in as cooperating witnesses.
I know a lot of times these indictments name these unindicted co-conspirators. They refer to them as John Doe 1 or Jane Doe 1 or whatever. Are there any like that in this indictment?
They're not listed that way, but I think they exist. And my guess is they're not listed because there was a concern about witness tampering that was part of the bond hearing in this case, that I think they didn't want to list people like that potentially could have adverse issues relating to them appearing in court.
What do you think of the federal judge's ruling keeping him in custody, not letting him out? I think he offered a $50 million bond, give up his passport, wear an ankle monitor, whatever, and they nixed all of that.
Well, his lawyers did a textbook job of trying to get him a bond. I think it's predictable that they didn't give him a bond. Major benefit to the government by him not getting a bond. Big power play, number 1. How they arrested him. He was there in New York, wanted to surrender himself. They prevented that from happening, and then they got a detention hearing. Big power play for the government.
Is that why Diddy went to New York? He was staying at this hotel on 57th Street. He went there waiting to be indicted because he knew it was coming?
He went there to surrender, telling the government he was there to surrender. Nevertheless, they went and arrested him, knowing where he was.
Let's explore that, Bruce. Why would the government do that? If he's willing to, he shows up with the white flag, his hands in the air, I surrender. Nope. Go back to your hotel, we're going to arrest you.
It's all about power and control. And the government wants to get control at the very beginning of the case. Diddy is a very strong person, very strong personality. They don't want him to control the case. They want to be in control of the case. They being the government.
So they were sending him a message.
Absolutely.
Sum it up. What's the message they were sending?
The message is, this is the big leagues, this is big time, and you're dealing with us.
Don't fuck with the government.
In those words, yes. That's his reality, and that's what he's got to deal with.
So they went to the hotel on 57th Street and arrested him at the hotel?
Correct.
They usually strike really early in the morning.
I think that was in the evening, actually, and there's a video of him getting arrested, which somehow leaked out. The hotel surveillance cameras picked it up.
Oh, okay. So some media outlet probably paid a lot of money for it. And
Of course.
yeah, the last time I saw a hotel video involving Diddy was the video of him beating up the woman that I heard that the judge took into consideration in denying him a bond. True?
One of the issues, absolutely. One of the reasons to detain him. One of the major issues, the violence. Two ways they detained him. Number one, threat to the community because of the violence. Number two, risk of flight because of all the assets he had and ability to leave the country.
Although everyone pretty much knows who he is.
Everyone knows he is, and he took all these steps to try to show he's not a flight risk.
He certainly isn't now, is he?
No, and the problem is he's in jail. He certainly doesn't want to be there. It's hard to describe the difficulty his lawyers are going to have in getting the case ready with him sitting in that jail. His mind has to be preoccupied by staying alive in that jail. It's a horrible place, and the time that he needs to be spending getting ready for trial is now being divided between preservation of himself and also getting ready for his case.
Sounds like a lot.
It's a lot on anybody, especially someone like him.
In a place like that.
A place like that, a person who, let's face it, is a control freak and has had control of his environment for 20 years at least. And now at 54 years old, all of a sudden that control's taken away from him. And he has a lot of things, on his plate he's got to deal with that he cannot control.
I know that at the outset, just according to the indictment, drugs, sex parties, celebrity stuff that one would expect. Videotaped for future negotiations, perhaps?
He did a lot of videotaping, and they say he watched the videotape while enjoying some sexual pleasure himself. He is a sex fiend, according to the government. Now, is that a crime?
We'll get to that in a moment. But before we do, I just want to ask you about the criminal enterprise that has been alleged against Diddy. Can you just sum it up in a sentence or two? I know it's under the RICO statute, but what have they alleged that he was involved in terms of a enterprise?
The enterprise basically is all of his businesses. They describe it as the Combs enterprise. So they're saying he used his business to facilitate his sexual addiction, basically. Remember, they had 2 search warrants, so they seized all sorts of records, plus other things I would assume they also have gathered.
But if the feds put something in an indictment, does that tell you that they probably have evidence locked up already that backs it up?
Not only is it the feds, this is the Southern District of New York. This is the top of the food chain for prosecutors. All right, they are not sloppy. They're not incomplete. They do a thorough job before they indict somebody.
And do you believe that there's other people who will be indicted in this case?
I'm not sure they'll be indicted. My guess is there are other people that have already made deals that are going to be cooperating and be testifying against him.
And when would Diddy find out about that?
Discoveries usually comes out within the first 30 days, so he'll get notification of it. There'll probably be some protective orders so the outside world doesn't know who they are, and that his lawyers and he are not allowed to communicate who these cooperating witnesses are, because there's certain concerns about threats to witnesses and witness tampering.
So they're saying he used all of his different businesses and enterprises. I understand the guy's a billionaire.
To fund all these things that they say are decadent and violating the law.
It sounds like a well-oiled machine. 1,000 bottles of baby oil, Bruce. WT.
So what? Isn't that the defense of that? So what?
This is a great segue to get to the real question I have for you. If Diddy called you to hire you, would you represent him, yes or no?
Yes, but.
Okay, we'll get to the but in a moment. First of all, just for the record, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he was smart enough to hire you, because you're at the top of the food chain for criminal lawyers, definitely in South Florida. You're always one of the top names that comes up, and you're well known as a very prominent
I appreciate that,
guy.
But let's be clear. The lawyers he have are top-notch lawyers. This is not some rinky-dink DUI lawyer. These are the real thing. They're representing him. They're well-known, and they've been involved in this type of case before. One of them is Mark Ericas's daughter. Another one is from the Brofman law firm, Ben Brofman, and he represented Diddy in his state case in the late 90s. He was acquitted. So these are top-notch people that know what they're doing.
You told us, so would you represent Diddy if he came to you?
It has to be on my terms, all right? The terms will be that there's one quarterback, that's me. He can tell me everything he wants to tell me, make every suggestion he can, but at the end of the day, all the decisions are my decisions, except whether he testifies or not. Constitutionally, that's his call. But all the other decisions, how to structure the defense, how to present it, that's my call, including whether I might be poking some fun at him during the course of the case to humanize him, to make him more palatable, if you will, to the jury. Remember, this is all about winning with the jury.
Understood. First of all, do you think any experienced criminal lawyer at your level would have the same requirement about who's driving this bus, who's steering that ship? Because that could be a non-starter with a guy like Diddy with a huge ego and personality, right?
And I think anyone who's had experience, and a lot of experience, would have the same condition. It's disaster to have it otherwise.
So have you turned down cases and big fees in cases from people who are just overbearing and want to tell you what to do and how to run the case?
They always agree to it, and then you get halfway through the case, and then there ends up being a problem. So in federal court, it's a major problem because you can't get out of the case. So I've had to deal with that type of an issue.
What you're saying is that in federal court, if you're representing a defendant in a criminal case, you can't just withdraw and quit the case.
Exactly.
You need the judge's permission to do that. And when would a judge let you withdraw, if at all?
There has to be like a real viable conflict that can be demonstrated to the judge. And I'm not about to rat out my client to a judge. Generally speaking, you have to eat it and deal with it and realize you made a mistake in judgment.
And we've all made those in hindsight, haven't we?
Of course.
How much would you charge Diddy if he came to you and asked you to represent him?
Be a 7-figure fee.
So it would be between $1 million and $9,999,000?
Somewhere in between that.
And what would that be based on?
Amount of time in the case, significance of the case, what needs to be done, what resources need to be utilized, and how important it is to him.
Bruce, is Diddy ever getting out of jail, in your opinion?
I think he has a reasonable chance to win, actually, Russell.
First of all, we have 1,000 bottles of baby oil. We have videos of these parties with people, from what I've read, involved in sex acts, with prostitutes, doing drugs, and all of these things. I know that there's human trafficking allegations that people cross state lines. That's part of it, right? So how on earth, what defense could you possibly come up with to such strong evidence that is out there already?
What you just described sounds like pornography to me. And sounds like pornography that Diddy produces, directs, and maybe even acts in.
Would that be your defense?
That would be the part of the defense for sure.
So lay out the defense. Make your best case, counselor.
The defense starts out with, okay, this is a world which most jurors are not familiar with. So what I want to make sure is that I can show that world to the jury and interpret to the jury through my representation what his world is, so they understand what it is. Part of that begins with jury selection, right? There's a big generational gap between people who even know who Diddy is and what he's about and other people's world, okay? I would think arbitrarily 45, 50 years old, anyone over that probably is not real clued into anything about Diddy. Obviously, you only have a certain number of challenges on a jury, but you want to focus on who you want to have on that jury. If you're going to have people over 50, you need to be able to explain to them what this world is about. And even though it's not their world, it's not a world that's criminal.
Would you want jurors over 50 in a case like that?
It depends. There's a conflict in this case that's going to be a tension all the way through the case. Sort of the Me Too aspect of the case, which is pretty offensive by
Which is what?
What he did to, allegedly did to women, sexual oppression and so forth, is bad. But also there's a libertarian part of the government staying out of people's private life. So there's certainly a question, why should the government get involved in his private life? What he does in his bedroom, even though his bedroom is expanded to hotels and things like that, where he invites other people in. So it's going to be interesting. So there are people over that age that might not be familiar with Diddy that might have a more open-minded sense that, wait a second, government is good for certain things, but certain places they have no business being, and certainly no business prosecuting someone and trying to put him in prison the rest of his life.
Isn't that what R. Kelly's lawyers argued? Because the feds just came after him and now he's in prison.
They might have argued it, but R. Kelly had a big problem with the age of his victims. And at least what's alleged in this case, Diddy does not have that same problem.
So R. Kelly was convicted of sex crimes involving minors.
There's nowhere in the indictment that talks about that, which is significant that it's not there. You would think if they had evidence like that, they would have put it into the indictment.
So you're saying that, in your opinion, Diddy has a valid defense, and it's called the pornography defense.
He's a pornographer, and these people that were involved had a choice. Did they want to be involved or not involved in these, what they call freak parties, right? That's the big sex shows that took place that he's videotaping. And they had a choice. Do they want to be involved or not be involved? And I think the presentation to the jury is that no one that age that got involved did it without knowing what would be involved. Maybe not all the details, but knowing it was going to be basically an orgy. And they chose they wanted to be in an orgy for whatever reasons was personal as to each of them.
It is an orgy, the more I think about it.
I can get you on my jury?
I'm not so sure. I've been watching a lot of videos, mostly on social media, from these prosecutors or these former prosecutors, and they all seem to be singing the same song about how terrible this is, how awful this is. Now, you too are a former federal prosecutor, and now you're on the defense side. Do you agree with these guys, these talking heads that I've been seeing?
I understand why they're saying it. I don't agree with their conclusions. Yes, there are a lot of facts that are going to be presented, but I think the one thing they're all really missing, okay, is a celebrity factor. And it's so difficult to weigh that in evaluating what a jury's going to do. Having represented people that are high-profile people, especially a cult person like Diddy, okay, jurors are reluctant to convict somebody at that level unless they really think they have no alternative. And they're going to search and try to find ways which they think maybe he did some things, maybe he wasn't the best person, maybe he's not perfect, but we don't think he should be convicted of this.
You keep talking like this, you might get a phone call from Diddy to come in as co-counsel.
He's got great lawyers. He doesn't need me.
But you're another great lawyer. Why not? When these guys say lawyer up, they usually get an army of lawyers, don't they?
I think these guys know what they're doing, and they're going to do a hell of a job for him. The point is, this is a winnable case. And I think that the more they can normalize in his world what took place, the more important it's going to be for his defense. They're going to have to humanize him. They're going to have to poke fun at him a little bit also to bring him down to earth so he's not above everybody else. And there's ways of doing that. He's got to know it's going to happen and be accepting of that.
Bruce, let's get real. What about the part in the indictment where it says that women were drugged and held against their will? And assuming that women will come forward and testify to that, I'm sure the government has some evidence to back that up. How do you get around that? Isn't it just a matter of whether these women are to be believed or not, despite who the lawyer is?
So here's the issue, okay? There's, at an orgy, okay, I don't know how many you've been to. I haven't been to any.
I'll take the fifth.
My guess is in the Diddy world of Hollywood and Miami and New York, there's drugs. So people entering those arenas, drugs are going to be involved. The critical question I look at for every single person that comes in is, I was drugged. After you're drugged, did you come back a second time? Because to me, that's the ultimate determination of credibility. Because it was so bad, you were drugged, this horrific thing happened to you, why would you come back the next time? And my guess is there are a lot of next time people, and I think that shoots their credibility, even more so than them getting civil payments and civilly suing Diddy and getting money in their individual lawsuits.
I've heard that this whole prosecution thing came about because of some failed settlement negotiations.
What I heard was this is the ex-girlfriend. She's the one I think is listed in count 2 as victim number 1. She threatened to sue him, and he's claiming he was being extorted. He refused to settle. The lawsuit was filed. The next day it was settled. Right after that, she went to the government. That's what I've heard. Whether that's accurate or not, I don't know, but that's what I've read and heard as far as took place. If that did occur.
Sounds plausible, by the way.
If that did occur, that you settle, he pays millions of dollars, I would assume, if that was a settlement, and then you run to law enforcement, I think jurors are going to have a big problem with that. And the biggest problem I think they're going to have that for the government in that point is they're going to say, wait a second, justice was done. She has been remedied for what happened to her. So if she has been remedied for that, why should we take another remedy by convicting this guy and put him in prison the rest of his life? I think that's a big issue for the government they're going to have to overcome.
How many years is he looking at?
Count 1, there's a special sentencing provision which has a 15-year mandatory minimum sentence. 15 years, no early release, no good time, no nothing.
And that's the racketeering conspiracy.
Count 2, I think, also has a mandatory minimum. Count 3 doesn't. I wonder why Count 3 was included. I think there's still a possibility of a plea agreement. Count 2, it's a prostitution count. I also looked at that as possibly a compromise count for the jury. They really didn't want to convict him of the more serious stuff. That count, which the worst scenario would be a 10-year sentence, of which he would serve probably, if he got the maximum, maybe 6 or 7 years of that sentence.
So you mentioned something about plea discussions. You think that there's a possibility that Diddy is being offered a plea or is discussing a plea with the government?
My guess is his lawyers will discuss it with the government, like one would do in every single case, if that's an option out there. There's rumors there are other high-profile people that were involved in some of these escapades. There might be other targets that the government has. I don't know that. At least I've read that might be a possibility. That might be a ground for a plea negotiation, although the policy in the Southern District of New York is not to plea to a lesser count. It's a plea to the major count. So, who knows why it's really there. It's a weak count. It's a prostitution count, flying people on interstate commerce to engage in prostitution. So every pornographer, everyone who makes pornography is probably guilty of that. But why is Diddy being prosecuted for it?
So you're saying that people in pornography movies are all prostitutes by definition of law?
Correct.
Federal law?
It could theoretically be federal or state law also.
So why don't they prosecute them?
Because I don't think prostitution is thought of as a crime that most jurors would be that excited about. The only prostitution cases you really hear about are the ones where some attractive agent is standing on the corner of whatever street and soliciting middle-aged men or older men, and they pay whatever for whatever, and they get charged in state court. I don't think there's an appetite in jurors for that whatsoever. And I think juries are concerned about what the government is doing in prosecuting people, and they really don't want their resources being used to prosecute things that really aren't that serious, and certainly are offended by it and don't want to condone it by convicting somebody.
So if pornography has basically been normalized to the point that the public might be somewhat less objectionable to it, then in the Diddy case, they're saying he was a pornographer. And therefore, they shouldn't care about that either.
I think that's going to be one of the approaches available to the defense. It all comes under the broad category of jury nullification. And jury nullification is basically, listen, the jury doesn't think this is that bad that this person should be convicted. And I've seen it numerous times representing pro athletes, representing law enforcement officers, where if technically speaking there's a crime committed, but the jury just doesn't want to convict someone like that of this crime, and they're going to find reasons, not to convict them.
So even though the jury will receive jury instructions and will be sworn to follow those instructions to the letter, jury nullification is basically when they say, yeah, we know what the instructions say, but it's not that bad, so let's just do this.
How they say it, it's not been proved beyond a reasonable doubt. So the verdict in this case is going to be not guilty, which does not mean innocent. It means not proved. And that's the lane that jurors travel when they decide nullification cases.
Okay. Any further thoughts about the Diddy case that we haven't discussed yet?
I think we've covered a lot, and it's going to be interesting how it proceeds. And this is going to be a high-profile case. The media is going to be covering it. But I think it's important to recognize how difficult a case it is for his lawyers. There's a lot of things that if they go too far and step on a thin piece of ice, if you will, it could be disaster. So it's going to be like a real model for a defense attorney how to navigate all these areas to be presenting the case in the best possible light.
This is one of those cases that has to be handled in the same way that porcupines make love, very carefully.
I think that's a very good analogy, and it's something which it's not. Most people are tuned to who did it, right? This is not who did it, the case, right? This is not, did he do something? He did it.
About who did he? That might be a good juror.
There you go. But
someone doesn't know who the hell he is. If there is such a person.
It's not an alibi defense. One of the things that's been thrown out there, you talk about what's on social media right now, is that this is a consent case. I don't think consent is an aspect of it.
Saying that the participants were all consenting adults. Do you think they had release forms?
Probably a lot of them do. My guess is they go to these parties, they give them their cell phones when they walk in the party, so nothing is recorded. And
except by the host.
Of course. Okay. And then they sign NDAs, and they exist, which is okay. I don't know how viable those things really are. Probably the host thinks they are, but they really aren't. But I think in the bigger scheme, so what? So what are we prosecuting something like this? What did he really do that was that bad? And the individual things that he did, there's an arson charge in here. The story is that supposedly he got mad at someone who was dating one of his girlfriends or something, and the guy's car got put on fire. It was torched. Pretty bad, okay? But
unless it was a faulty fuel filter. My friend's Ferrari burned up in front of us because of a fuel filter that caught fire. Isn't that a possibility?
See, I don't have any friends that are rich enough to have Ferraris, so I just don't know. I think the approach to that for the defense attorney is, listen, that's a state court crime. If he was guilty of arson, let the state prosecute it, but not in federal court, not part of a RICO. And it's something that really should not be here and should not be something that you people should be convicting of.
And what are your personal feelings about that? Do you think it should have been filed, if at all? And if so, by the feds or by the state?
I think if it's going to be filed, it should have been filed federally, as by the state. I think there's every reason to file it. I think people made a very calculated decision that this was necessary. There's rumors about him and other things that supposedly he was involved in, and I think they made a decision this was their best shot to go after him. And I don't know that for sure, but having read things and connected dots, I think that's what happened in this case.
I wonder what the list of attendees at these parties looks like. Certainly some names that we've heard of. I know celebrities tend to stick together, but there are other high-profile people. What if their names are on that list?
There's rumors of politicians that have been at some of these parties, including the Hollywood people that you would expect, especially in Los Angeles. And those are things like certainly the public is clamoring to hear that stuff. In my mind, it helps him a little bit, Diddy, normalizes it to a certain degree. If these things were that bad, why are these people attending these things? Why are they coming back to it if they're really that bad of an event? And I think that's something which will be presented maybe in a more subtle way by the defense attorneys, but I think something that's going to be important as part of the defense.
I know that Justin Bieber, at a minimum, knew Diddy and actually hung out with him and spent time with him. I saw a video of them together. And I know that Justin Bieber was a minor during many of those years when he was an emerging young star. I sincerely hope that Justin Bieber was not violated in any way, and I hope that he only helped his career. But let's see how that unfolds.
Let's hope so. I have not heard or read anything that celebrities are lining up to become witnesses in this case. My guess is they're doing everything they can not to be involved in the case at all.
But with the feds, the witnesses don't have to line up because the feds come knocking, and when they do, you answer the door, or what happens?
You can get subpoenaed to the grand jury. Okay, there could be threats that are made, okay, of prosecution.
I was talking about a battering ram to knock the door down so they can hand that to you.
I don't think they would do that just to give you a subpoena. They might save it for another circumstance, but not to give you a subpoena. But if that happens in representing high-profile people, they certainly all have Fifth Amendment privileges because it's being alleged to be a crime scene, basically. And if they're called to testify, they certainly have a Fifth Amendment privilege. Before they do, they could be immunized by the government and forced to testify. But again, I don't see people wanting to be part of this. I see just the opposite, people doing everything they can to disassociate themselves with it.
When do you think the videos of these sex parties will show up on YouTube?
Never.
Why not?
Because they're going to be part of discovery in the case. And unless they're released, if the civil attorneys have it, you know how civil attorneys work, that could get released at some point. But as far as the criminal prosecution, there's going to be a protective order that the parties cannot release anything. And since the government has them, if they are released, it's going to be the government's DNA on them. And that would be a big problem in this case.
So in all likelihood, clips from these movies will probably just show up on TikTok.
Possibly. Now, after the trial is over, different scenario. But I think before the case is tried, they shouldn't pop up anywhere.
But do you think a lot of people are nervous about this?
Of course.
Really nervous about this?
Really nervous, yes.
Have a lot of lawyers been retained already by these people in all likelihood? Or, you know?
My guess is the calls have been made, just in case calls, just in case there's an inquiry, do I have someone available to me? And my guess is if you're a lawyer speaking to somebody, if an agent comes up to you, be very polite and say, here's my attorney's name. I totally want to cooperate, but let my attorney talk to you.
And fuck off.
Not in so many words.
Bruce, thank you so much for coming on the
Russell,
podcast
it's a
today.
pleasure.
It's always great to see you.
Good to see you too.
I'm honored to have you again.
I'm honored to be here.
But you're still under subpoena. I reserve the right to bring you back upon reasonable notice. Is that okay?
I'll talk to my lawyer about that.
Okay, thank you.